Welcome to Off the Record, a legal podcast.
Hello and welcome to Off the Record, a legal podcast with attorney Rhett Burney. I am your host, Kevin Rosenquist, and today we are diving into the essentials you need to know about family law in South Carolina. Rhett, thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely, Kevin. Thank you.
All right, so today we're going to talk about trusts and estate planning. So to start off, can you explain exactly what a trust is and how it fits into the broader estate planning process in South Carolina?
One of the biggest questions we get every single day is, does a person need a will or do they need a trust?
Right.
And I won't get too deep into it, but a trust is a document that sets up an entity to hold your property. So it tells those people that may survive you or even while you're alive. The trust is over your property and helps you where your property is going to go and how it's going to be used. So it's a lot different than a will, because the trust goes into effect while you're alive, and also has an effect when you die. A will, on the other hand, does not go into effect until you die. So they're two different things, but we're often using the trust nowadays, depending upon the situation, to help people get their estate planning in order.
Is it different than creating an LLC for your stuff? I know some people do that, right, for property and whatnot.
Yeah, so we'll set up an LLC, limited liability company, for a company. I have some companies that are LLCs, but really we can put an LLC into a trust. The trust can hold the LLC, because it's a different animal, really.
Why should someone consider creating a trust as part of their estate plan rather than just relying on a will?
Yeah, so with a trust, your assets will not go into probate, won't go to probate court if you do it properly. You have to always sit down with a lawyer and decide whether the trust is what you really need, because a trust is an expensive document. Not everybody needs a trust. I think higher net worth people may need a trust. If you have a lot of businesses, you may need that trust to help decide or help to tell those who survive you how your business is to be treated. I think if you're a blended family, is probably one of the main reasons to have a trust. Because if you have a man and a woman who get remarried and they each have children and you just do a will, the man leaving everything to the wife and the wife leaving everything to the man. Well, typically somebody's going to die first, and then the survivor can then change their will. And where originally they had all the children, both sides children, dividing everything, that survivor can then change their will and give everything to their children, or they may get remarried. So you can be that husband who does a will with the spouse, your wife, who then remarries after your death. Then she dies, and then some stranger you've never met gets all of your assets. So I think in those blended type families, it's a good idea to do a trust. If you don't trust your spouse, it's probably a good idea to do a trust as well, because as people get older, dementia sets in, and it's easier to go ahead and start planning things in advance. It's a disaster to wait until later in life, because who can tell the future? You don't know when you're going to die or when you're going to become disabled or mentally deficient. So it's better to do it now rather than later. A lot of people think that they're too young to even start thinking about estate planning. I will tell you, if you have children, you need to do it now, because otherwise you could have your children own half of your assets with your spouse. And Kevin, I can't remember how old your child or children are, but they're young, right?
4. I have a 4-year-old.
Yeah, 4-year-old. You don't want a 4-year-old owning your house or your business with your wife. That's a recipe for disaster. So I think I fussed at you before, Kevin, that you needed to go work on that. Have you done it?
I'm asking the questions here, Rhett. No, but I do need to. I know. That's funny.
Bad news, Kevin. You're going to die. Okay, you will die.
Whoa. Maybe not.
Hopefully not soon.
Maybe not. With AI and everything, you never know.
Live forever.
What are some of the common misconceptions that people have about trusts in South Carolina?
One, that they need one. Their state really may not be such. It may be so simple they really don't need to set up a trust. People, like I said, people call us all the time. They want to trust. And I make a lot more money off the trust. Okay, so I would be pro trust all the time. But not everybody needs one. And I sit them down and I tell them, hey, we can do a trust, but given your assets that you have, you don't need it. We can take certain steps, naming beneficiaries to accounts or retirement accounts so that you don't need a trust. But there are lots of times where somebody does need one. And it's so fact specific, really.
Well, so what are the different types of trusts that people can create, and how do they serve people's different situations?
Yeah, we'll just talk about the most common ones. You have a revocable trust or an irrevocable trust. I would tell you that 99% of the people out there need a revocable trust, a living trust, family trust, because it's very flexible. While you're still alive, you can change it. We can get into the irrevocable ones, but I think for the most part, anybody listening to this podcast, more likely than not, you need a revocable trust, a living trust, something that is in effect while you're alive, so you can make changes, fund it while you're still alive, and so forth. But there are lots of different types of trusts, but those are the main ones, with revocable being the most popular and the one that I tell people they need more than any other.
What about a special needs trust? How does it help families in South Carolina plan for the care of a loved one that might have disabilities?
Yeah, so if you're receiving certain types of government assistance, if you have too many assets, you could lose, your Medicaid. You could lose that benefit if you inherit or have too many assets in your name. So what we'll do lots of times is set up a special needs trust. So it's the trust owning that asset, owning that property. And the effect is the person whose benefit that trust is for doesn't then lose their governmental benefits, because if they do, we all know how much healthcare costs. So, in this situation, if they own too many assets, they may lose their Medicaid. And if you lose Medicaid, that can be a very bad situation depending upon what your specific circumstance dictates.
Yeah. So once a trust is established, what happens next? How is the trust administered after the person who created the trust passes away?
Sure. So, Kevin, we'll use you as an example, since you don't listen to any of my advice. So let's say that you set up a trust, right? You and your wife set up a trust, and I won't use too many legal terms here, but you set the trust up, but you and your wife are also the trustees of the trust and the beneficiaries of the trust. And so one thing that is so important with the trust is you have to fund the trust. The trust has to own something. Just because you set it up doesn't mean that there's anything in it. Mm-hmm. So, Kevin, what I would tell you, put your business into the trust, for instance. Put your bank accounts into the trust. And that's just simply naming the bank account, the Kevin's bank account, right? Or the Kevin's trust, and put it in, name the bank account that. If you have a house, we would put the deed into the name of the trust. And then when you die, because men, we usually die first, die before our wives, because that's just the way life goes. Then your wife, she would still own the house, or the trust would own the house, but she would still receive the benefits of the house, of the accounts. And then when she dies, we would have someone over the trust as well who could administer it for your child, depending upon what age your child is. And so it really flows without too much interruption, because one of the last things you want to do is die, and then all of a sudden you can't access assets to keep the family running because they're locked up into Kevin's, single bank account. All the money's there, and your wife can't get to it for a period of time until she can get an estate open. So if we had it set up as a trust and she's a trustee, life's going to keep on going even without you, Kevin.
Nah. So what are some of the most common mistakes that you see people make if they're setting up a trust in South Carolina?
Yeah, sometimes they can just make it overly complicated. So many people want to keep control of their assets beyond the grave, and that's okay. Depending upon, especially your children, you don't know what you have a 4-year-old, you don't know what that child's going to be like when they're 18 or 20. They may be the most responsible child in the world, or they may not be, but people want to, I've seen them take trust and it pays out until the child doesn't get the money until they're 65. Well, great. What good's that going to do them at that point, right? Mm-hmm. They may have needed it beforehand. They may have needed it at a house. Also, they just don't fund it. That is the biggest thing that we see. They just don't fund the trust. They don't put assets into the trust. And as lawyers, we always give a list. Hey, these are the things you need to do. I'm not going to be there always. Every time Kevin buys a new beach house or a new lake house or a new boat, I'm not going to be there to remind you to make sure that goes into the name of the trust. So just getting the document doesn't cure all the problems. You have to make sure that it's administered properly.
I had $1 for every time I bought a beach house. My goodness. So if someone is considering a trust as part of their estate plan, what's the first step they should take?
Yeah, obviously come to talk to a lawyer. One of the other misconceptions, Kevin, is even though you have a trust, what we do, we also draft a will, pour over will, because if you forget to fund the trust, we want to make sure that assets that you did not put in the trust get put into the trust upon your death. So when we do a trust, we also do a will as well, because that's just proper estate planning. Decide who you want to be the trustee of your trust once you or you and your spouse are no longer alive or no longer mentally capable of administering the trust. When you have a young child who's 4, for instance, you kind of have to, who is the person that you trust in order to be over your trust if you and your wife aren't there? With that person, make sure they want to do it, make sure they can do it, figure out, bring a list of your assets, not your knives and your forks and your couches and all that, but those things of substantial value. So your lawyer knows to tell you, and your lawyer can look at that asset to make sure that they list in the trust what assets are to go in the trust. So we can do it right there at the beginning, rather than, giving it to you, Kevin, and saying, Kevin, make sure you do this, and you go back to your own life and you don't do it. Right? Everybody's like that. You
mentioned a couple of times that people forget to put stuff in the trust. Like how does that happen? Is it just because they're acquiring more things and they forget to add it? Is that pretty much what happens?
Yeah, they'll go buy a house, or they'll open up a bank account or an investment account, and they'll just have it in their individual names. And rather than doing that, put it in the name of the trust. And so that way it will be in the trust. Because when you go buy a new car, maybe a car is a bad example, but I said your beach house or your lake house or whatever, make sure it's in the name of the trust. Or if you start another LLC, put the LLC into the trust, or your corporation. It may be owned by the trust. And meet, as a lawyer, I like to meet with my clients every couple of years. I would love for them to go ahead and schedule another appointment just so I can sit down and ask them some of those questions that we've gone over today to make sure they've done what I've told them to do. If you have a life-changing event like a death, divorce, or a marriage or a birth, those are the times, if nothing else, that you sit down with a lawyer and say, hey, these things have changed. Or, when your 4-year-old's no longer 4, your 4-year-old's graduating from college or getting married, sit down with your lawyer. Lots of times people, when we look at their estate planning, they have just dodged disasters just by luck. Not everybody's that lucky. We make more money off of people that don't properly plan. When you properly plan, it hurts your lawyer's feelings because we don't get to make as much money off of you. But, as lawyers, we are advocates for our clients. We don't want your spouse or your family to have a hard time or to fight. That's the other thing that people don't realize. Estate planning is more than just making sure your assets, go past probate or go to that right person. You also want to make sure you preserve your family, right? Because the last thing you want is to have your spouse fighting with your child or your children or your child's new spouse. Because when you document everything and get it nicely wrapped up in a package, it lessens the tumultuous fighting that we see so many times in families. Because, Kevin, I'll tell you, I have never seen a fist fight or a fight in criminal court, but I've seen it in probate court where people are fighting over money. Because that's all there is in probate court. It's just money and figuring out how to divide it. So if you can properly plan, you can bypass all of that and help preserve your family in the end.
Is there a dollar amount that you kind of go by as far as like what to be put in, what gets put in there? You made the comment, like if you buy a new car is not necessarily something to put in there, but if you bought a classic car or a Ferrari or something, maybe that does go in there. Not that I'm buying Ferraris, I'm spending all my money on beach houses, but
sure, yeah.
Was that something that if you own really nice art, if you own like all that kind of stuff, do you recommend that kind of stuff goes into trust?
Yeah, our run-of-the-mill couches and chairs and computers, you don't have to worry about that. But I think if it has some type of substantial value, there's no definite answer to that. What is a lot to me may not be a lot to you. Definitely anything with a title, like a car, you may consider putting that into a trust. Maybe not. For you, you're still young, so you're probably going to have 50 more cars before you have to worry about it. But car, definitely real estate, definitely accounts, savings account, checking account, an investment account, because you may not have a lot of money in them now, but you might in the future. So I don't necessarily say there's a specific amount you have to worry about. When we get into tax planning and all of that, that's a whole different boring conversation. Yes, those amounts do matter. And when we're trying to get around different things with spousal elective shares and all that, yes. But for purpose of the regular run-of-the-mill guy, run-of-the-mill female, I wouldn't say there's any specific amount. I think you just have to look at if it's worth losing, or you would feel it if you lost it, then that's probably the thing you need to put into a trust.
Yeah, true. So if anyone's listening who's a better planner than me and actually is working on this, like, are there resources that you recommend looking at, and then before they contact you, should they just come right to you and just kind of give you the rundown? What's your advice there?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you can go online and do things, but I think you have to. I think you can just make a simple list. You don't have to overly complicate it. Give your lawyer a general list of your assets. Your lawyer will ask you, how much you think your assets are worth, or what you're worth, because then that tells us whether we need to be thinking about, some pretty strategic tax planning. Do you have children? If you and your spouse die, who do you want to be over your children, to make decisions for your children, to raise your children? Get those names together. That's usually one of the things they forget to talk about or think about. Or the husband has, his brother, he wants to raise his children, and his wife wants her sister, and they start fighting there in our office. Try to figure all that out before you get into our office, because we don't know the people that we can advise you, but I think your friends and family members more than anybody else. But just a general list, and how you want your assets to be divided upon your death, and when you're dealing with children, when you want them to be able to access those assets.
Great advice as always, Rhett. Well, thanks for tuning in to Off the Record, a legal podcast with attorney Rhett Burney. For more information or just connect with Rhett, you can visit rhettburney.com. And don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel and leave us a review in the comments. Rhett, great to see you again. Thanks so much for being here.
All right, Kevin, next time I talk to you, make sure you've got your will done.
Depends on when we talk next.
All right, Kevin. Take care.
Take care.
Bye.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.